Welcome to One Smart Person and Greg Gutfeld. We got a really smart person today. Dr. Moran Cerf is a neuroscientist and a business professor at the Kellogg School of Management and the neuroscience program at Northwestern University. His academic research uses methods from neuroscience to understand the underlying mechanisms of our behavior, our psychology, our decision-making, and our dreams. He's into consciousness, which I'm always wondering about. But why I have him here is that he's actually working on a chip that can be inserted into the brain that would make people smarter. This kind of freaks me out. Dr. Cerf, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yes, so my dumb question is going to be right off the bat. I don't see how, the brain is this big clump of wet meat, and a chip is not. And I know that I oversimplified this, but isn't that the most complicated part of it? Is how do you get something that is not wet and meaty to go into something that's wet and meaty?
That's a good question. And actually, a third of the project of kind of putting chip inside people's brains is dedicated to just finding ways to put it inside.
Right.
And right now, the best way we found is to drill a hole in the brain and put it in. That is why we mostly do it with patients who have a brain disorder that requires a surgery anyhow, and that's the kind of additional part of the surgery. We did not find a way yet to actually have you swallow a pill or put something in your veins that gets to the brain, and that's what a lot of my colleagues spend most of their time on.
Now, have you got, in terms of progress, when you insert this chip into somebody who's having the brain surgery, have you been able to get a chip to work and have a certain effect on thinking yet, or is it still too soon?
No. So there are kind of two branches to this. One is studies on animals, and that's where we get a lot of things happening pretty rapidly. We put a chip inside a mouse brain and we see how we can make the mouse do things better. So that's just a proof of concept with animals.
Right.
And with humans, we mostly work with people who have brain surgery for something else, and we put the brain there for a different reason, and then we give them some added advantage. So there are about 40,000 people in the US right now who already have a chip inside their brain for clinical purposes. They have Parkinson's disease or a clinical depression that can be remedied to an extent by those chips, and that's why they get their implant put there, and we say, you know what, let's give you one additional ability because of that.
Wow, I didn't know that. See, so I got to ask you, how much, with your goal in mind, how much smarter do you envision, if this chip is successful, make people? Is it strictly about intelligence and like, I feel like it might be pretend intelligence, right? Like it's like almost like taking a cell phone, shrinking it down and putting it in your brain. Is that kind of what it's like, maybe?
So step one, you said it correctly, is just taking the kind of app that you're using right now as an interface and putting it in your brain. So instead of having to type an entry and then get Wikipedia's answer to your phone, to your brain, you'll just be able to think something and Wikipedia is going to feed it straight into your brain. And that's already not little. Like you can have the entire internet in your mind. That's step one.
Right.
And step two is actually giving you more access to processes inside your brain that right now are happening under the hood and actually making you control more of your brain. So the extent that I can immediately suggest would be controlling your emotions. So right now, your emotions happen to you. You don't really control them. It's not like you're saying, my mom is sick, I activate sadness for 10 minutes, okay, turn it off right now let's activate anger. They kind of happen to you, but they're in your brain. With a device that actually have access to those emotions, you can now decide to control them and maybe to minimize sadness for an hour because you need to work and you can't afford to be as sad as you were in the morning, and you have some more control over things that happen under the hood.
Wow, okay. So I'm split on this because I like to think of myself as a rational human being, and I really dislike emotional people, especially emotional people who are in positions of power, like judges who decide somebody's guilty because they didn't have lunch. So I like this idea of the ability to turn off emotion, but at the same time, you essentially become maybe a walking computer. I mean, if I turn off my emotions, I'm Mr. Spock, which might not be a bad thing, but then I'm not me, right?
So you just, in your question, basically demonstrated all of the problems. On the one hand, we're conflicted about the advantages, but we also see the kind of challenges of that. We don't know what we want. We don't know if we want to be the way we are right now, which is governed by a mix of emotions and rational thinking, or we want to be totally Spock, or we want to be totally governed by our emotions. To an extent, we want all of them, and we want to be able to choose at the right time when to be what. And these devices give us this power at the price of us having to decide how to live our life. And right now, we only had one option. We never really lived the world through different options. Now we're giving you the tools, but we still don't know what's the right approach, and that's to everyone's to decide for themselves.
Yeah, you know, it's like with your phone, the phone is in your hand. It's not inside your brain, so you don't have any surgery. You just got to carry this thing around, but you can shut it off. So I guess the compromise here would be to create, or the solution would be to create something that you can shut off. The question is, would you ever shut it off? Like if you could be IQ of 200 all day, would you want to shut off to be stupid? Now, comparatively at 100, which is actually the average human, I think, or I think it's 100, that would be like you become like a barnyard chicken. You'd never want to go back, right?
Yeah, you said everything. I mean, you're hitting the point. So we have a lot of data that shows that people that actually have, less worries about life tend to be happier. All of us think that we should be smarter, but actually the evidence shows that maybe being smarter is not going to lead to being happier. So maybe you actually want a little bit different direction with this thing. We don't know the answer to that. And I think that the risks are not just in letting you choose, but also in the fact that right now there's this strong belief among people that they know what's good for them.
Yes.
And if you just give them the full kind of control, they're going to choose right. And this is at best flawed, if not totally wrong. So, the entire system is kind of predicated on the idea that the customer is always right.
Yes.
Or the voters knows best, or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. All of those sentences suggest that you actually, if you kind of close your eyes and dig into your mind, you will know the answer. And right now, if we put something in your mind that actually thinks for you and gets information from the outside world, you might be biased to not be accurate to what you actually want yourself. And that's one risk. And the other risk that is kind of pointed out about what you asked is that if we start increasing people's kind of thinking, IQ, mental abilities, we also might actually divert the species, those who have and those who have not. And suddenly you have inequality between people that are super smart and can think faster, do high frequency trading in their mind and be richer compared to the regular people who cannot. And it's not because they're not starting in the same place, it's because they somehow got kind of extra help that makes them totally superhuman.
I mean, it would be the same thing if it was a physical improvement and suddenly there was a class of people who are 4 times faster than everybody else, and then they would be amazing criminals because you could never catch them, and there would be a lot of resentment towards those who have the chip, especially if the only people who could have this chip were wealthy because it's expensive. The only way this could work is if you make the chip available free, so you don't create a class warfare, right? You'd have to make it so that everybody has it, because if only the Silicon Valley billionaires have it, there's going to be hordes of dumb people with pitchforks coming after you.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And I think that historically, if you look at the past, when technologies were available, they ended up actually not going to everyone uniformly, but going to the wealthiest, going to the people who have kind of more access, more control. You can go, back to the days of the kings in France who had ice cream before their peasants could have them, to having grass among only the rich and not the poor. All of the examples across history show that when something comes up that is good, it first goes to people who can, and it creates quick inequality. We've never had inequality of that level where someone is much smarter than other, and this might really create 2 species, not just 2 kind of independent kind of people that are a little bit unequal.
So there's a kind of the benign way of looking at it is it's like the people that had car phones first were wealthy people. They were big clunky phones. People that had the biggest TVs, the theater screens, were the rich celebrities. And now you can buy a 50-inch screen for under $200, like $100. But part of that, and it's the answer that always comes up, what happens when you invent something or a technological achievement, or the technology gets ahead of our grasp? And I feel, look at social media, I think is ahead of our grasp. In the way that we treat each other on social media, I worry about artificial intelligence. If that gets out of the bag before we know how to close the bag, we're screwed. This is the challenge, is to be able to allow this technology to take place while we can still control the consequences, right?
Yeah, I think that the difficulty here is to tame it, because science is speeding up and offering us new tools and new abilities, and we have to choose not to use them, or at least to tame them or regulate them if we want them to be equally distributed and so on. And historically, we were not really good at that. We always were very kind of greedy. I think that there's an episode of The Simpsons that I really like, where Homer Simpson talks to Mr. Burns, and he tells him, "Mr. Burns, you're the richest guy I know." And Mr. Burns says, "But I would give it all up for a little more." That's been us for the last centuries. We always want more, and if there's something that allows us to have more, we want it.
I thought you were going to bring up the Simpsons episode when Homer gets smart. Do you remember that? There's an episode.
Of course.
Yeah, he becomes smart, and then what makes him less? I can't remember what happens. What did he do? Was it a drug? I can't remember how he went smart, but then at the end, he goes back to normal Homer. I don't know, but I want to ask you another question. By if this chip can make you smart in different places, it reminds me a little bit of Guitar Hero, which is you learn to play guitar by like certain patterns. Could this take the pleasure out of playing chess or learning guitar? Because now anybody can do it at a top level, so you no longer feel any kind of special pride at the effort that you put into learning something.
Yeah, I mean, so to an extent, I think that the more technology gives us powers, we become less kind of impressed by the ability to use them. So, my mother used to be proud of how she could navigate. That she could go from one place to another just by her memory, and she remember. This is no longer something that I can be impressed by, because I can do that as well. I just type the source and destination and it gets me there. So there's no pride anymore in being able to remember all of those. My little brother remembers 100 phone numbers in his mind of his friends. That's also like a useless skill right now. That's like a waste of his brain cells. So in that sense, I think that the more we can replace the need for a brain cell to solve a task and find a device that does that, we kind of need to find new things to be impressed by.
It's such a great point. It's like, well, yeah, that's a great skill to have, but you don't need it anymore. So, therefore, you might be shifting the definition of human intelligence, because once everybody is a data genius and can hold 100 figures and can navigate, that might allow for other attributes that aren't affected by this, and suddenly you become known for something else. I don't know what that would be. Like, if this phone is inside my head, then, by the way, I could never go on Jeopardy, or the show Jeopardy would not exist, because all Jeopardy would be doing is testing your phone. It wouldn't be testing your knowledge. So Jeopardy game shows.
We can go one step further. I think that in many ways, a lot of things that we compete on right now are based on the assumption that we're born the same and some skill got us a little bit better. But if we're starting to engineer ourselves, a lot of things are going to change. So we're talking about brains, but you can even talk about bodies. If we can now genetically engineer a person whose legs are wider and taller, and he can take a 100 meters race with 40 strides rather than 44, like the best runners out there, then he will win the race. But is it he who is really winning the race, or the doctor who gave him the pills, or the mothers and fathers who gave them DNA? We're becoming races between doctors rather than racing between athletes.
Yeah, it's true, and it goes to that point that the human being is not really a human being is a result of all of these things. So why not? I mean, why not have steroids? Why not? It's like, because our brain cells are different. I mean, our cells are different. I don't know how. Don't we replace all our cells like regularly? So I'm not even who I was when I was 20.
That's right. And so we within our lifetime, we replace ourselves. In fact, one of my kind of colleagues said nicely, you wouldn't buy a laptop if you had to guarantee using the same laptop for the next 80 years.
Right.
Why do you do it with your body?
Yes.
Why do you kind of say, I was born this way, I'm not going to change anything? And one kind of idea behind that is that we're kind of religious to an extent about our bodies.
Yeah.
We think that whatever we were born with is ours, we shouldn't change it. But we already made a few shifts in history towards changing that. So I think that in the US, there are a lot of people who get their teeth straightened.
Yeah.
And it's not what biology gave you, but you kind of feel that because society likes this type of teeth rather than that type of teeth, everyone should align themselves with this particular thing. I think that about 70 years ago there was the introduction of the breast implants, and first people were outraged. You mean you're going to put something silicone inside my body? That's outrageous. And I think 70 years later, not only is it mainstream, but I think one of every fourth girl for her sweet 16th birthday asks for breast implants in the US. So, it moved to becoming mainstream. I think that the same thing's gonna happen with brain implants. The first person is gonna put it and we're gonna be outraged. It's gonna be the headline of the news. A person in Silicon Valley put a chip inside his brain and he's now smarter than all of us, and everyone's gonna be amazed, also shocked. And 70 years later, it's gonna be the mainstream. Everyone's gonna do it when they're born because that's how you should live your life.
You know what's funny is you'll be able to tell, like if this is really effective, you'll be able to tell, like when a person would get really obvious breast implants, and you got like a porn star or whatever, it could be the same with a brain implant, where the desire to show it off makes it obvious to everybody. Oh, that guy's got a brain implant. He's just I can't stand him. Now he thinks he's Mr. Know-It-All, but all he did was he paid for his brain. It's the same way a woman would go like, oh, those are fake. Stop looking at them. They're fake. And so the brain implant and the breast implant, it could be on the same level somehow. I want to ask you, because your area of expertise too is consciousness, and I'm always curious. I mean, I'm just curious what you think consciousness is. It always is, but it's always one or two things. It's either something that's on the outside, something outside of the body, and so that lends itself to the idea of a simulation or a higher being, which is probably the same thing. The idea of somebody operating us, or is it the product of like a steam that's coming from all these cells and biochemical reactions in your brain? Well, I'm just curious. Where we don't. This is the eternal question. What do you think?
So it is the eternal question. It is the reason scientists should go to science, because those are the questions that are really worth spending a lifetime exploring.
Yeah.
I'm on the second camp between the two that you posed right now. The one that said it's emergent property, something that kind of comes up when you put a lot of systems together and let them run. Yeah. And in that sense, I think that we're getting closer to building one, which is, I think, the interesting part for us.
I'm interviewing another scientist. Actually, he's a scientist. He's from MIT, on the idea of simulations. What do you think about that? Is that just more like kind of like something you think about when you smoke a joint? Like, it's like, dude, we're all in a simulation, man. What do you think about that?
So there's the cookie kind of Silicon Valley conversation about whether life is a matrix and we're all kind of in this big bubble, not knowing what's going on. But I think that there is something that is more interesting as a conversation topic, which is that we can now play with reality inside your mind and give you different views of reality. So here's what I mean by that. We think that what we see is reality. You think that what your eyes propose, what your nose offers, what your tongue suggests is reality. But now we can play with that and give you different realities. So suddenly you see different things with experiments. So we can play on this chip inside your brain and have it do things differently, so you will see different realities. And now you start to question the reality that you're in.
Wow, it's and also just when you start reading like quantum physics, and you start about collapsibility and all that other stuff, and it just like it's mind-blowing. Literally, it is actually literally mind-blowing. So the last question to you, Doc: how far off is this chip? Is it a decade? Is it 5 years? I mean, an actual where it's something on the lines of like a breast implant that you can go and have confidence that it's going to be inserted and work?
So there are kind of 3 streams of research that would combine to make it happen. One is building the chip and actually making sure that it talks to the brain. I would say here we're 90% there.
Right.
Stream number 2 is how do you get it inside the brain?
Yeah.
Without surgery. Here we're very far.
Yeah.
Most of the focus right is just finding ways to get inside your brain without drilling a hole inside one. And the third stream, and that's I think where your audience and you need to spend most of your time talking about, is the ethical and the legal part.
Right.
Like, do we want it? If we do, how do we want it to work? Does society need to regulate that, and so on?
Yeah, it's a social.
With those 3 together, we're gonna figure it out.
Yeah, you have the biology, the scientific side of it, but it's the social side that is like the kind that you know what. And I'll let you go because I'm going off into other tangents. it's kind of the same thing when you talk about anything like even like nuclear power. The social, the social fears, the social aspects, like nuclear power is associated with nuclear weapons and also with widely publicized meltdowns, and so people have a fear. Autonomous cars. People cannot get around the idea of an autonomous car, but somehow they got around actually driving cars or getting into a plane in the 1920s and hurtling through the sky in a silver tube. You know, they got over that. I think, and also to your point about breast implants, they got over that. So it seems to me that like even the surgery is something you can get over if you know that it works. I don't know. The only thing
there's a saying among scientists that the difference between science fiction and science is timing. And I think it's true for a lot of our inventions right now.
Yeah.
Something that 5 years ago was impossible now is mainstream.
Yeah. You know what didn't work? I worked at Men's Health in the 90s, and there was this promising research on penile enlargements, and they thought that this was going to go on the same scale as breast implants. It didn't, because it was always being rejected. So that was like one area where I don't think any guy was going to take the risk because it didn't work. It was like, but if they knew that it worked, they would have lined up around the block for miles. But the fact that you don't see that is because they never figured out how to make it work. And that's the key.
I'm with you.
Yeah. All right, Doc. Thank you so much. That was
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, awesome. Good luck, and I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
Wonderful.
Thank you. We are out.